The August sun was beating down mercilessly on the weathered cedar planks beneath my knees, when Margaret Sullivan appeared in the doorway, with a glass of ice water and words that would change everything. 3 hours earlier, I'd been just another contractor fixing a rotting deck in suburban Phoenix. Now, I was questioning every assumption I'd made about love, age, and the courage it takes to speak your heart. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Tuesday morning started like any other. My truck pulled into the driveway of 1247 Maple Ridge Drive at exactly 7:30, toolbox rattling in the bed and country music drifting from the radio. The house was a beautiful 2-story colonial with cream siding and forest green shutters, the kind of place that screamed stability and middle-class success. What caught my attention immediately was the deck extending from the backsliding doors, or what remained of it. The previous week, Margaret had called Peterson Home Repairs, explaining that several boards had started sagging dangerously, and she was worried someone might fall through. When I'd come by for the estimate, she'd met me at the front door wearing paint-splattered jeans and an oversized flannel shirt, her graying auburn hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had kind eyes and laugh lines that suggested someone who found joy in everyday moments. "You must be Jake," she'd said, extending a firm handshake. "I'm Margaret. Thank you for coming on such short notice." The damage was worse than she'd described over the phone. Nearly half the deck boards were rotted through from years of Arizona monsoons and neglected maintenance. The support beams underneath showed signs of termite damage, and the entire railing system was wobbly enough to be dangerous. "Ma'am, this is going to require a complete rebuild of the affected section," I'd explained, crouching down to show her where the structural integrity had been compromised. "I can salvage about 60% of the existing frame, but everything from here to the house needs to come out." Margaret had nodded thoughtfully, running her fingers along one of the warped boards. My late husband always meant to fix this himself. He was handy with projects around the house, but the deck just kept getting pushed to the bottom of the list. There was no self-pity in her voice, just the matter-of-fact tone of someone who'd learned to handle life's disappointments with grace. She'd been widowed 3 years, she'd mentioned during our conversation, and was finally getting around to the home improvements that had accumulated during her husband's lengthy illness. Now, returning with my crew of 2 to begin the demolition, I found Margaret already awake and moving around in the kitchen. The morning air still held a hint of coolness that would disappear within the hour, and I wanted to get the heavy lifting done before the temperature climbed past 90. "Morning, Mrs. Sullivan," I called out, hauling my circular saw from the truck. "Please, call me Margaret," she replied through the screen door. "And there's fresh coffee if you'd like some before you start." My crew, Danny Rodriguez and Mike Chen, both solid guys I'd worked with for years, exchanged glances. Homeowners offering coffee wasn't unusual, but something about Margaret's genuine warmth stood out. Most clients wanted us to work efficiently and invisibly, finishing the job with minimal interaction. We spent the first hour carefully removing the damaged decking boards, stacking the salvageable pieces for later use. The work was methodical and satisfying. There's something therapeutic about tearing out something broken and preparing to build it back stronger. Danny handled the power tools while Mike and I focused on the structural assessment underneath. "This beam here is completely shot," Mike observed, pointing to a support post that crumbled when he applied pressure. Termites had a field day. By 9 o'clock, we'd cleared away most of the damaged material and were ready to begin the rebuild. That's when Margaret emerged from the house, carrying a tray with 3 glasses of ice water and a plate of homemade chocolate chip cookies. "I figured you might be getting thirsty," she said, setting the tray on a small patio table that had escaped the deck demolition. "I baked these last night, an old family recipe." Danny and Mike practically dove for the cookies, mumbling thanks, through full mouths. I was more reserved, accepting the water gratefully but politely declining the sweets. Something about eating a client's homemade cookies felt too personal, too much like accepting hospitality rather than maintaining professional boundaries. Margaret noticed my hesitation and smiled. "They're not poisoned, I promise. My grandmother's recipe, she brought it over from Ireland in 1952. "They smell incredible," I admitted, "but I try to keep things professional on job sites." "Suit yourself," she said with a shrug. Through her eyes held a hint of amusement. "But if you change your mind, they'll be here." As the morning progressed, Margaret found reasons to check on our progress every hour or so. She wasn't intrusive or micromanaging, just genuinely curious about the process and appreciative of the craftsmanship involved. When I explained how we were upgrading the support structure to exceed current building codes, she asked intelligent questions about load, distribution, and weather resistance. "You really know your stuff," she observed, watching me measure twice before making a cut on a critical support beam. "Have you been doing this kind of work for a long time?" 15 years professionally, I replied, adjusting my tape measure. "Started right out of high school working for my uncle's construction company. Went out on my own about 8 years ago." "Do you enjoy it?" "The work, I mean." It was an unexpectedly thoughtful question. Most people assume construction work was just a job, a means to an end rather than something you might be passionate about. "I love it," I said honestly. "There's satisfaction in taking something broken and making it better than it was before. Plus, every project is different. Different challenges, different solutions." Margaret nodded approvingly. "That's wonderful. So many people seem to just tolerate their work rather than finding meaning in it." By noon, we'd made significant progress. On the framing, the new support structure was taking shape, and the deck was already noticeably more solid than what we'd torn out. The temperature had climbed to the predicted 93 degrees, and even with the shade from Margaret's oak trees, the work was becoming grueling. That's when she appeared with the ice water that started everything. "You boys look like you're melting out here," she said, carrying 3 tall glasses filled with ice and lemon slices. "I added some lemon, helps with the heat." Danny and Mike accepted their drinks with obvious relief, finding shade under the nearby pergola. I remained, kneeling beside the deck frame, putting finishing touches on a joint that needed to be perfect. "You're incredibly meticulous," Margaret observed, settling onto a nearby lawn chair. "I've been watching you work, and you check every measurement 3 times. Measure twice, cut once," I quoted the old carpenter's axiom. "But I prefer to measure 3 times and be absolutely certain." That's a good philosophy for more than just carpentry. Something in her tone made me look up from my work. Margaret was studying me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not romantic interest exactly, but a kind of appreciation that went beyond gratitude for home repairs. "You're very thoughtful about everything you do," she continued. "The way you've been careful not to damage my flower beds, how you cleaned up each section before moving to the next, even declining my cookies because you wanted to maintain professional boundaries." I felt heat rising in my cheeks that had nothing to do with the Arizona sun. "Just trying to do good work, ma'am." "Margaret," she corrected gently. "And you're doing exceptional work. But more than that, you're considerate, patient. You explain things without talking down to me, and you clearly care about doing the job right rather than just doing it fast." The compliments were making me uncomfortable, in a way I couldn't explain. Margaret Sullivan was an attractive woman, there was no denying that. But she was also a client and a recent widow, and significantly older than my usual dating demographic. "Thank you," I managed. "I appreciate that." "You're so sweet," she said quietly, and then after a pause that seemed to stretch forever, "I'm 48. Is that too old for you?" The glass of ice water slipped from my hand, hitting the newly installed deck beam with a sharp crack before shattering across the concrete below. Margaret's question hung in the air between us like smoke, impossible to ignore, and equally impossible to address while my crew was within earshot. I started, then stopped, acutely aware that Danny and Mike had gone suspiciously quiet under the pergola. "Mrs. Sullivan, I think we should focus on getting your deck finished." Margaret's cheeks flushed pink, but she didn't look embarrassed. More like someone who'd finally said something they'd been thinking about for days. "Of course. I'm sorry. That was inappropriate." She disappeared into the house before I could respond, leaving me staring at broken glass and questioning everything I thought I knew about reading people. Had I been misinterpreting her friendliness all morning? Or worse, had I been unconsciously encouraging something without realizing it? "Dude," Danny's voice carried across the yard, barely above a whisper. "Did that lady just ask you out?" "Get back to work," I muttered, grabbing a push broom to sweep up the glass. The last thing I needed was my crew gossiping about my personal life, especially when I had no idea what my personal life was supposed to be anymore. The afternoon shift felt different. Margaret stayed inside, though I occasionally caught glimpses of her moving past the kitchen window. The easy camaraderie of the morning had evaporated, replaced by an awkward tension that made every hammer strike seem too loud, every power tool screech unnecessarily harsh. By 3 o'clock, we'd completed the decking installation and started on the railing system. The new boards were a rich cedar that would weather to a beautiful silver gray over time, and the craftsmanship was some of my best work. Under normal circumstances, I would have felt proud of the progress. Instead, I kept replaying Margaret's question and my fumbled response. "Jake, you've been measuring that same board for 10 minutes, Mike observed, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Either cut it or marry it, but make a decision." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He was right. I'd been holding the tape measure against a railing spindle without actually processing the numbers, my mind elsewhere entirely. This was exactly the kind of distraction that led to mistakes, and mistakes on railings could be dangerous. "Take 15, I told my crew. "Grab some shade and hydrate." Danny and Mike didn't need to be told twice. They retreated to their truck, cranking up the air conditioning and probably discussing whether their boss had lost his mind. I remained on the deck, double-checking measurements and trying to regain my professional composure. The sliding door opened behind me, and Margaret stepped out carrying a small dustpan and whisk broom. "You missed some glass," she said quietly, kneeling to sweep up fragments I'd overlooked near the foundation. "I didn't want anyone to step on it." "Thank you." I watched her work, noting the careful way she collected even the smallest shards. "Margaret, about earlier." "Please don't apologize," she interrupted, not looking up from her task. "I'm the one who should be sorry. You're here to do a job, and I made things uncomfortable." "You didn't make things uncomfortable. You made things complicated." She glanced up at that, her hazel eyes searching my face. "Complicated how?" I set down my drill and sat on the edge of the new decking, my legs dangling over the side. "Complicated. Because I'm 32 years old, and you're my client, and you just lost your husband 3 years ago, and I have no idea what the appropriate response is to any of this." Margaret finished collecting the glass and stood, brushing dirt from her knees. "The appropriate response would be to tell me you're not interested and finish the job professionally. That's what most people would do." "Is that what you want me to do?" "What I want," she said slowly, "is for you to be honest. Not professional, not appropriate. Honest." The directness of her request caught me off guard. Most conversations about attraction were layered with subtext and careful dancing around the subject. Margaret was asking for something much more vulnerable, truth without the protective barriers people usually maintained. Honestly? I looked down at my hands, calloused from years of construction work. "I've been attracted to you since I first came by for the estimate. You're intelligent, kind, beautiful, and you make me laugh without trying. But I've been telling myself it's inappropriate because of our professional relationship, the age difference, and the fact that you're still grieving your husband." Margaret leaned against the deck railing, testing its sturdiness. "I appreciate your honesty. Can I return the favor?" I nodded, not trusting my voice. "I haven't been attracted to anyone since Robert died. Not once in 3 years. I thought that part of me had died with him." She paused, running her fingers along the smooth cedar rail. "Then you showed up last week with your careful measurements, and your genuine interest in doing good work, and something woke up that I thought was gone forever." The weight of her admission settled between us. This wasn't casual flirtation or passing attraction. It was something much deeper and more frightening. "Age doesn't bother you?" I asked. Margaret laughed, a genuine sound that transformed her entire face. "Jake, I'm 48, not 88. 16 years isn't an insurmountable gap, especially when the younger person shows more emotional maturity than most men my age." "And the professional relationship?" "Will be over when you finish the deck. Probably tomorrow, based on your progress." She was right, of course. By Thursday afternoon, the job would be complete, payment would be rendered, and we'd have no reason to see each other again unless she called for future work. "What about your husband?" The question came out more bluntly than I'd intended. "Are you ready for whatever this is?" Margaret's expression grew thoughtful, Robert and I had 17 years together. He was a wonderful man, and I loved him deeply. But he's gone, and I'm still here, and I don't think he would want me to spend the rest of my life alone because I was afraid to take a chance on happiness. The sound of truck doors slamming announced my crew's return from their break. Danny and Mike approached the deck with studied casualness, clearly aware that some significant conversation had taken place in their absence. "How are we looking, boss?" Danny asked, examining the railing installation. "Should be able to wrap up tomorrow, right?" "That's the plan," I confirmed, standing and brushing sawdust from my jeans. "Let's focus on getting the spindles installed this afternoon." Margaret retreated toward the house, pausing at the sliding door. "Jake, would you like to stay for dinner after your crew leaves? I'm making lasagna, and there's far too much for one person." Danny and Mike exchanged glances, their expressions carefully neutral. This was clearly a personal invitation, not a general offer to the work crew. "I'd like that," I heard myself saying. "What time should I come back?" "You don't need to leave. Just knock on the door when you're finished for the day." After she disappeared, inside, Mike shook his head slowly. "Man, I don't know whether to congratulate you or warn you that you're about to step into something way over your head." "Probably both," I admitted, picking up my drill with renewed focus. "Let's finish this." Deck. The remaining hours of work passed quickly, partly because we were in the final stages of a job that had gone smoothly, and partly because I was anticipating the evening ahead. By 6 o'clock, we'd completed the railing installation and cleaned up the job site. The deck looked magnificent, sturdy, professionally crafted, and built to last decades. As Danny and Mike loaded their tools into the truck, I found myself nervous in a way I hadn't experienced since high school. When was the last time I'd been invited to dinner by a woman who intrigued me this much? When was the last time the stakes had felt this significant? "See you tomorrow, boss," Danny called out, starting the truck. "Try not to do anything we'll have to hear about at breakfast." I waved them off and approached Margaret's sliding door, my reflection staring back from the glass, work clothes, sawdust in my hair, and an expression of barely contained anticipation. The shower in Margaret's guest bathroom was a godsend. She'd insisted I clean up before dinner, pointing out that her late husband's clothes were still in the master bedroom closet if I needed something fresh to wear. The offer felt too intimate, too much like crossing a line I wasn't ready to cross, so I declined and made do with washing my face and hands, running wet fingers through my hair to tame the sawdust. When I knocked on the sliding door, 20 minutes later, Margaret had transformed as completely as her backyard. Gone were the paint-splattered jeans and oversized flannel. She wore a simple black dress that hugged her figure in all the right places, her auburn hair now loose around her shoulders. She'd applied makeup with a subtle hand, just enough to enhance her natural beauty without looking like she was trying too hard. "You look beautiful," I said, the words escaping before I could censor them. "Thank you." She stepped aside to let me in, and I caught a hint of perfume, something light and floral that made me want to step closer. "I hope you're hungry. I may have gone a little overboard." The kitchen smelled like garlic and herbs, with an underlying richness that made my stomach growl audibly. Margaret laughed at the sound, gesturing toward the dining room where she'd set the table with actual cloth napkins and wine glasses. "When you said lasagna, I was picturing paper plates and a beer," I admitted. "I don't do anything halfway," she replied, opening a bottle of red wine. "My mother always said if you're going to make an effort, make it count." The dining room felt formal, in a way that made me acutely aware of my work clothes and calloused hands. Margaret had used her good china, delicate plates with tiny blue flowers around the edges, and lit several candles that cast dancing shadows across the walls. "This is incredible," I said, accepting a glass of wine. "You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "It wasn't trouble. I haven't cooked for someone else in months. It felt good to have a reason to use the dining room again." The admission carried unexpected weight. I imagined Margaret eating alone at her kitchen counter night after night, the formal dining room gathering dust while she worked through her grief. The thought made my chest tighten with something that might have been protectiveness. "Tell me about your family," she said, settling into the chair across from me. "Are you close with your parents?" "Very close. My dad's a retired electrician, and my mom teaches 3rd grade. They live about an hour north in Flagstaff. I try to visit every couple of weeks." "Do they know about your business?" Are they proud of what you've built? The question caught me off guard. Most people asked about my work in practical terms: how many employees, what kind of projects, whether business was good. Margaret seemed genuinely interested in the emotional aspect of my career. My dad's thrilled that I followed a trade. He always said college wasn't the only path to success, but I think he worried I'd end up stuck in some dead-end job. When I started Peterson Home Repairs, he was my first investor. Gave me $5,000 from his retirement fund to buy my initial equipment. Margaret's eyes softened. That's wonderful. What about your mother? She worries that I work too hard and don't have enough time for relationships. I paused, realizing the irony of discussing my mother's concerns about my love life with a woman who just asked if she was too old for me. She's been dropping hints about grandchildren for the past 5 years. Subtle hints, I'm sure. About as subtle as a brick through a window. Last Christmas, she gave me a book called The Art of Finding Love After 30. She claimed it was a gag gift, but I caught her checking to see if I'd read it. Margaret laughed, the sound rich and genuine. I like her already. What about siblings? One, sister Emma. She's 28, married to a guy named Patrick who sells insurance. They have twin boys who are 4 years old and absolutely exhausting. Emma's constantly asking when I'm going to settle down and give her kids some cousins to play with. Sounds like a lot of pressure. Not pressure exactly, more like concerned. Optimism. They want me to be happy, and they think happiness requires a wife and kids. Margaret took a sip of wine, studying me over the rim of her glass. What do you think happiness requires? The question was deceptively simple, but I found myself considering it seriously. Connection, I think. Work that matters. The ability to build something lasting, whether that's a deck or a relationship or a reputation. What about you? I used to think it required security and predictability. Robert and I had our lives planned out. Retirement at 65, travel, grandchildren eventually. We were very careful, very responsible. She paused, turning her wineglass in slow circles. Now I think happiness might require the courage to embrace uncertainty. The lasagna was exceptional. Layers of pasta, meat sauce, and cheese that had been assembled with the same attention to detail Margaret seemed to bring to everything. We ate and talked about books, movies, travel dreams, and the small disappointments that accumulate over decades of living. I've always wanted to see Ireland, Margaret mentioned, refilling our wineglasses. My grandmother used to tell stories about County Cork, and I promised myself I'd visit someday. But Robert got seasick on boats, and he was nervous about flying overseas, so we kept putting it off. What's stopping you now? Fear, mostly. I've never traveled alone, and the idea of navigating foreign airports and hotels by myself seems overwhelming. You rebuild your entire social life after losing your husband. You're managing a house and finances independently. You had the confidence to ask a contractor 16 years younger than you if you were too old for him. I leaned back in my chair, meeting her eyes. I think you could handle Ireland. Margaret's cheeks flushed pink. When you put it that way, it does sound rather silly to be intimidated by travel logistics. Not silly. Just unnecessarily limiting. After dinner, she insisted on making coffee, and we moved to the living room where family photos covered the mantel and side tables. I found myself studying pictures of Margaret and Robert together. Wedding photos, vacation snapshots, candid moments that captured 17 years of shared history. He was a good man, Margaret said, settling beside me on the couch with 2 steaming mugs. Steady, reliable, devoted to his family. He would have liked you, I think. What makes you say that? You have similar values. You care about craftsmanship and doing things right. You're respectful, honest, family-oriented. Robert always said you could judge a man's character by how he treated people who couldn't do anything for him. I thought about the way I'd interacted with Margaret before I realized she was interested in me. The genuine respect, the willingness to explain my work, the care I'd taken not to damage her property or disrupt her routine. I've been thinking about what you said earlier, I admitted. About your husband not wanting you to spend your life alone. Margaret curled her legs under her, turning to face me fully. And? I think you're right. But I also think there's a difference between not being alone and being with the right person. What's the difference? Not being alone is about filling empty space. Being with the right person is about creating something new together. Margaret set down her coffee mug and studied my face in the lamplight. Which do you think this is? The question hung between us, loaded with implications and possibilities. I could feel the weight of the moment, the sense that whatever I said next would determine whether we moved forward or remained forever in the realm of what if. I think, I said carefully, that I've been attracted to you from the moment we met, but I'm also terrified of taking advantage of your vulnerability, or rushing into something neither of us is prepared for. And I think, Margaret replied, moving closer on the couch, that grief has taught me life is too short to waste time on fear. Her hand found mine, fingers intertwining with a naturalness that felt like coming home. Outside, the Arizona night was alive with cricket songs and the distant hum of traffic. But inside Margaret's living room, the world had narrowed to just the two of us and the electric possibility crackling in the air between us. "Jake," she said softly, "would you like to stay tonight?" The question lingered in the candlelit room like a held breath. Margaret's hand was warm in mine, her thumb tracing gentle circles across my knuckles while she waited for an answer that could change everything between us. "Margaret," I said quietly, "I want to. More than you know. But I need you to be absolutely certain this is what you want, not just something you think you should want." She smiled, an expression that held both tenderness and determination. "Jake, I'm 48 years old. I've been married, buried a husband, and spent 3 years learning to live alone. I don't make impulsive decisions about important things. This feels pretty important." "It is important. That's exactly why I'm asking." I studied her face in the lamplight, looking for any sign of doubt or hesitation. What I found instead was a woman who had thought this through completely, who understood the implications and had chosen to move forward anyway. "Yes," I said finally. "I'd like to stay." Margaret's smile widened, and she stood, extending her hand to help me up from the couch. "Good. But first, I have a confession to make." My stomach tightened. "What kind of confession?" "I've been planning this since Tuesday morning. The dinner, the wine, the dress, none of it was spontaneous." She led me toward the staircase, her fingers still intertwined with mine. "I've been thinking about you every day since you came to look at the deck." "Every day?" "Every day." I told myself it was ridiculous, that I was reading too much into professional courtesy and good customer service. But then you'd do something thoughtful, like moving your truck so I could get out of the driveway easier, or explaining why you were upgrading the support beams beyond what I'd paid for. And I'd realize it wasn't just professional courtesy. We paused at the bottom of the stairs, and Margaret turned to face me. "I haven't felt this way about anyone since Robert, and the intensity of it scared me. That's why I asked you directly today. I couldn't stand another day of wondering what if." The honesty in her voice was breathtaking. Here was a woman who had decided to risk rejection and embarrassment rather than spend another night wondering about possibilities. "I'm glad you asked," I said, lifting our joined hands to press a kiss against her knuckles. "I was going crazy trying to maintain professional boundaries while wanting to know everything about you." "What did you want to know?" "Everything. What you read before bed, what makes you laugh, whether you sing in the shower, what you dream about when you're not worried about practical things like deck repairs." Margaret laughed, the sound echoing in the stairwell. "I read mystery novels, laugh at old sitcoms, sing terribly off-key, and dream about adventures I'm too practical to pursue." "What kind of adventures?" "Learning to tango in Buenos Aires, taking a cooking class in Tuscany, riding a motorcycle across the country." She started up the stairs, tugging me along. "Scandalous things for a suburban widow." "Those don't sound scandalous, they sound wonderful." Robert thought they were impractical. He wasn't wrong. We had a mortgage, retirement savings to worry about, his medical bills toward the end. But now you could do any of those things. "Now I could do any of those things," she agreed, stopping at the top of the stairs. "If I had the courage." The hallway was dimly lit, with several doors leading off to different rooms. Margaret guided me toward the master bedroom, then paused with her hand on the doorknob. "I should warn you," she said. "I haven't done this in a very long time. I might be rusty." The vulnerability in her admission made my chest tighten with affection. Margaret, there's no performance pressure here. We can take this as slow as you need. She turned the doorknob and led me into a room that was distinctly feminine but not overly decorated. The bed was queen-sized with a wrought iron headboard, covered in soft blue linens that looked inviting and comfortable. One bedside table held a stack of books and a reading lamp. The other was completely clear. That was Robert's. Sighed, Margaret said, noticing my glance. I haven't been able to put anything there yet. The admission hit me with unexpected force. This wasn't just about physical intimacy. It was about Margaret reclaiming space that had been defined by loss and loneliness. We don't have to use this room, I said gently. We could… No. Margaret's voice was firm. This is my room now. My bed. My choice. My life. I want to be here with you. She moved to the dresser and lit a few candles, casting the room in warm, golden light. The flames danced across the walls, creating an atmosphere that was romantic without being overly staged. I bought new sheets yesterday, she said, smoothing an imaginary wrinkle from the comforter. Egyptian cotton. Completely impractical and absolutely wonderful. You've been planning this longer than you admitted? Maybe. She turned to face me, her expression playful. Are you complaining? Not even a little bit. Margaret approached slowly, her hands reaching for the buttons on my work shirt. May I? I nodded, standing perfectly still as she worked each button free with careful precision. Her touch was gentle but confident, and I found myself holding my breath as she pushed the shirt off my shoulders. Your hands, she said, taking my palms in hers and examining the calluses and small scars that came from years of construction work. They tell stories. Not very interesting stories, mostly involving splinters and stubborn screws. I think they're beautiful. They're evidence of work that matters, of things built to last. She pressed a kiss to the center of my palm, and I felt the gesture all the way to my core. Margaret, shh. She placed a finger against my lips. Let me appreciate you. What followed was unlike anything I'd experienced before. Margaret approached intimacy with the same attention to detail she brought to everything else, taking time to explore and appreciate rather than rushing toward a destination. She was patient and thorough, generous and surprisingly playful. You're thinking too much, she whispered at one point, when I became distracted by the magnitude of what was happening between us. I'm trying to memorize this, I admitted, in case it's the only time. Margaret pulled back to look at me, her hair falling across her face in waves. Jake, this isn't a charity case or a one-night stand. If you think I went to all this trouble for something casual, you haven't been paying attention. What is it then? It's the beginning of whatever we decide to build together. The certainty in her voice was intoxicating. Here was a woman who understood that relationships, like construction projects, required planning, commitment, and the willingness to work through challenges. Afterward, we lay tangled in the Egyptian cotton sheets, my arm around Margaret's shoulders as she traced lazy patterns across my chest. The candles had burned lower, casting shifting shadows across the ceiling. No regrets? I asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. None. You? Only that we waited this long. Margaret laughed softly. We've known each other for exactly 1 week. Feels longer. It does, doesn't it? She tilted her head to look at me. Jake, what happens tomorrow? When the deck is finished and you don't have a reason to come back? The question I'd been avoiding all evening finally demanded an answer. I was hoping you'd find other projects around the house that need attention. I might. The kitchen could use updating. The master bathroom shower has been dripping for months. There's a loose board on the front porch. Sounds like job security. Sounds like an excuse to keep seeing you while we figure out what this is. I pulled her closer, marveling at how perfectly she fit against my side. What do you think this is? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, her breath warm against my chest. I think, she said finally, this is what happens when two people stop being afraid of possibility. Outside, the Phoenix night was cooling toward dawn, but inside Margaret's bedroom, wrapped in expensive sheets and the aftermath of connection, the future felt suddenly full of promise. Dawn arrived too quickly, filtering through Margaret's bedroom curtains in soft orange streaks that painted the walls like watercolors. I woke to the unfamiliar sensation of someone else's breathing beside me. Margaret's face peaceful in sleep. Her auburn hair spread across the pillow like spilled wine. For a moment, I allowed myself to simply watch her, taking in the details I'd been too nervous to notice the night before. The faint freckles across her nose, the way her eyelashes cast tiny shadows on her cheeks, the small scar above her left eyebrow that spoke of some childhood adventure. She looked younger in sleep, free from the weight of loss and responsibility. That seemed to follow her during waking hours. My phone buzzed on the nightstand, a text from Danny asking if we were still starting at 7:30. Reality crashed back with the force of a sledgehammer. Today was Thursday. Today we finished the deck. Today I became just another contractor who'd completed a job and moved on to the next project. Except nothing about this felt like just another job anymore. Margaret stirred beside me, her eyes fluttering open with the slow awareness of someone remembering where they were and who they were with. When her gaze found mine, she smiled. Not the careful, polite smile of a client, but something intimate and unguarded. "Good morning," she said, her voice husky with sleep. "Good morning. Sleep well?" "Better than I have in years." She stretched, her movement causing the sheet to slip slightly. "What time is it?" 6:45. "My crew will be here in less than an hour." Margaret's expression shifted. The pleasant haze of waking up replaced by the practical concerns of the day ahead. "Right. The deck. The last day." "About that. Let me make coffee," she interrupted, sliding out of bed and reaching for a silk robe hanging on the closet door. "We should talk, but I need caffeine for important conversations." I watched her tie the rope around her waist, struck by how natural she looked in the morning light. This wasn't the polished, carefully put together woman who'd answered the door for my estimate. This was Margaret without armor, comfortable in her own skin and space. "Take your time getting ready," she said, pausing at the bedroom door. "I'll start breakfast." The guest bathroom felt different this morning, less like borrowed space and more like somewhere I belonged. I splashed cold water on my face and stared at my reflection, trying to process the shift that had occurred overnight. 24 hours ago, Margaret Sullivan had been a client. Now she was... what exactly? By the time I made it downstairs, the kitchen was filled with the aroma of bacon and fresh coffee. Margaret had dressed in jeans and a soft green sweater, her hair pulled back in a loose ponytail. She looked effortlessly beautiful and completely at ease, as if sharing breakfast with a contractor she'd slept with was the most natural thing in the world. "Danny and Mike eat breakfast?" she asked, flipping bacon in a cast-iron skillet. "Usually just coffee and whatever convenience store pastries they can grab on the way." "Well, they're getting a proper breakfast today. I made enough for the army." The domestic scene felt surreal. Margaret moved efficiently around her kitchen, preparing food for people she barely knew, simply because it was the thoughtful thing to do. I found myself imagining more mornings like this, waking up beside her, drinking coffee while she cooked, planning our day together. "You're staring," Margaret observed, not turning around from the stove. "Sorry. This just feels... overwhelming?" "Perfect. Which is what makes it overwhelming." Margaret turned to face me, spatula in hand. "Jake, last night was wonderful, but I need you to know that I don't expect anything from you. I'm not some lonely widow trying to trap the first man who shows interest." "That's not what I think." "Good. Because what happened between us was between two adults who are attracted to each other. No pressure, no expectations beyond honesty and kindness." Before I could respond, Danny's truck rumbled into the driveway. Margaret smiled and returned to her cooking, as if declarations of no-strings-attached relationships were perfectly normal breakfast conversation. "Showtime," I muttered, heading for the front door. Danny and Mike approached the house with the slightly cautious expressions of men who weren't sure what they'd be walking into. Their boss had spent the night with a client, a situation that violated several professional boundaries and potentially complicated the completion of their job. "Morning," Danny said carefully, studying my face for clues about the previous evening. "Everything. Okay?" "Everything's fine. Margaret's making breakfast for everyone." Mike's eyebrows shot up. "She's cooking for us?" "Apparently." Before they could ask more questions, Margaret appeared at the sliding door wearing a warm smile and carrying a plate of bacon. "Good morning, gentlemen. I hope you're hungry." I've got eggs, bacon, hash browns, and fresh biscuits. Danny and Mike exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for this level of hospitality from a client who'd crossed personal boundaries with their boss. "Ma'am, that's very kind. But you don't need to," Mike started. "Nonsense. You've been working hard. On my deck, and breakfast is the least I can do to show my appreciation. Besides, I enjoy cooking for people who appreciate good food." 20 minutes later, we were seated around Margaret's kitchen table, consuming what might have been the best breakfast any of us had eaten in months. Margaret had outdone herself. Fluffy scrambled eggs, perfectly crispy bacon, hash browns with just the right amount of seasoning, and biscuits that were light as air. "Mrs. Sullivan," Danny said around a mouthful of eggs, "this is incredible. Where did you learn to cook like this?" "My grandmother. She believed food was love made visible. Every recipe I know came from her kitchen in County Cork." "Ireland?" Mike asked. "That's cool. Ever been there?" Margaret glanced at me before answering. "Not yet, but I'm thinking about planning a trip." The conversation flowed easily around the table, Margaret asking about Danny's new baby daughter and Mike's weekend coaching Little League baseball. She had a gift for making people feel heard and valued, drawing out stories and showing genuine interest in their lives. "All right," I said finally, checking my watch. "We should get started if we want to finish by noon." The final phase of the deck project went smoothly. We installed the last sections of railing, applied a protective sealant to the new boards, and completed a thorough cleanup of the job site. Margaret checked on our progress occasionally, but she gave us space to work without hovering or micromanaging. 11:30, the deck was complete. I stood back to admire our work. Solid construction, beautiful craftsmanship, and attention to detail that would ensure the structure lasted for decades. Under normal circumstances, this would be the moment I felt pride in a job well done and anticipation for the next project. Instead, I felt an unexpected sense of loss. "Boss?" Danny said quietly, appearing at my shoulder. "You okay? You look like someone died." "Just thinking about the next job. We start the Henderson kitchen renovation Monday." "Right. The Henderson job." Danny studied my face with the perceptiveness of someone who'd worked with me for 3 years. "Jake, what are you going to do about Mrs. Sullivan?" "What do you mean? Come on, man. It's obvious you two have something going on. Question is, are you going to pursue it or walk away because you're scared of complications?" Before I could answer, Margaret appeared on the newly completed deck, running her hand along the smooth railing with obvious appreciation. "It's beautiful," she said, her voice filled with genuine admiration. "Even better than I imagined." "Built to last," I replied, the words carrying more weight than a simple description of construction quality. Margaret met my eyes, understanding the double meaning. "Some things are worth building to last." Danny cleared his throat pointedly. "Mike and I are going to load the truck. Take your time with the final walkthrough." They disappeared around the side of the house, leaving Margaret and me alone on the deck that had brought us together. The August sun was climbing toward its daily peak, but the shade from her oak trees kept the space comfortable. "So this is it," Margaret said, settling onto the top step of the deck stairs. "Project complete. Contractor paid. Relationship returning to professional boundaries. Is that what you want?" "What I want," she said slowly, "is for you to tell me what happens next. Because I meant what I said about no expectations. But I'd be lying if I said I didn't hope this was the beginning of something rather than the end." I joined her on the steps, close enough to catch the faint scent of her perfume. What would the beginning of something look like? Dinner on Friday night. Not here, somewhere public where we're not client and contractor but just two people, getting to know each other. Maybe a movie on Saturday, or a hike if you're feeling adventurous. Taking time to figure out if what we felt last night translates to something sustainable in daylight. The simplicity of her proposal was perfect. No grand gestures or dramatic declarations, just the normal progression of two people exploring a connection. "I'd like that," I said. "All of it." Margaret's smile could have powered the entire neighborhood. "Good. Pick me up at 7 on Friday. And Jake?" "Yeah? Wear something other than work clothes. I want to see who you are when you're not building things." Friday evening arrived with the kind of nervous energy I hadn't felt since my first high school date. I'd changed clothes 3 times, settling on dark jeans and a navy button-down shirt that Emma had insisted made my eyes look bluer. Standing in front of Margaret's door at exactly 7 o'clock, I felt like a teenager picking up his prom date rather than a 32-year-old man with a successful business. Margaret answered the door wearing a wine-colored dress that hugged her curves perfectly in heels that brought her almost to my eye level. Her hair was styled in soft waves and she'd applied makeup with an artist's precision. She looked stunning, but more importantly, she looked confident. "You clean up well," she said, her eyes appreciating my effort to dress up. "You look incredible. Ready for our first official date?" "I've been ready since Tuesday. I'd chosen Enzo's, an upscale Italian restaurant in Old Town Scottsdale that was intimate without being overly romantic. The kind of place where we could have a real conversation without shouting over loud music or feeling pressure to perform for other diners." The hostess seated us at a corner table with soft lighting and a view of the restaurant's courtyard garden. Margaret studied the menu with the same attention she'd given my deck renovation plans, asking thoughtful questions about wine pairings and preparation methods. "The osso buco sounds amazing," she said, "but I'm worried it might be too messy for a first date. Order whatever you want. I'm not the kind of guy who's intimidated by a woman with a healthy appetite." "Good to know. What about you? The ribeye?" "Actually, I was thinking about the seafood risotto. I don't get to eat much fine dining in my line of work." Our conversation flowed as easily as it had over breakfast, but with an added layer of intentionality. This wasn't casual kitchen table talk. We were actively getting to know each other as potential partners rather than contractors and clients who happened to be attracted to each other. "Tell me about your worst construction disaster," Margaret said after the waiter had taken our order. "Define disaster. The kind of story that makes you laugh now but probably made you question your career choice at the time." I laughed, remembering. 3 years ago, I was renovating a bathroom for this elderly couple, the Hendersons. Sweet people, married for 57 years. Mrs. Henderson insisted on keeping their ancient cast-iron bathtub because it had sentimental value. I sensed this is going somewhere expensive. The tub weighed about 400 pounds, and we needed to move it to access the plumbing underneath. My crew and I spent 2 hours carefully maneuvering it out of the bathroom and into the hallway. Perfect execution, no damage to walls or floors. Margaret was already smiling, anticipating the disaster. The problem came when we tried to move it back. Somehow, in the process of installing new subflooring, we'd reduced the bathroom doorway clearance by exactly 1 inch. The tub wouldn't fit. Oh no. Oh yes. We had to remove part of the door frame, which meant patching drywall, which meant repainting, which meant Mrs. Henderson crying because we'd ruined her bathroom. Mr. Henderson standing there with his arms crossed, asking why we hadn't measured twice and cut once. "How did you fix it?" Took me 3 extra days and about $600 in materials, but we got everything back to perfect condition. Mrs. Henderson was so happy, she baked me a chocolate cake and invited me to their anniversary party. That's a good ending. The best part was 6 months later. They called me to renovate their kitchen. Apparently, my willingness to fix my mistake without charging them extra convinced them I was trustworthy. Margaret nodded approvingly. "That says a lot about your character. Most contractors would have blamed the house settling or tried to charge them for the extra work. What about you? Any career disasters that make you laugh now?" Margaret considered the question while sipping her wine. "I'm a tax accountant. Most of my disasters involve decimal points and filing deadlines, which probably aren't as entertaining as construction stories. Try me. 2 years ago, I was preparing taxes for a small business owner who claimed unusual deductions. Nothing illegal, just creative. Home office, business meals, equipment purchases that seemed legitimate but pushed the boundaries. Sounds like most small business owners I know. Exactly. But I made an error when inputting one of his equipment purchases. Instead of entering $8,000 for a new commercial printer, I entered $80,000. That's a significant difference. The IRS flagged it immediately, of course. They couldn't figure out what kind of printing equipment could possibly cost $80,000 for a small marketing firm. My client got audited. I had to spend 3 days at the IRS office explaining the error, and the whole mess could have cost him thousands in penalties. But it didn't. Fortunately, the IRS agent had a sense of humor about it. She said it was the most honest mistake she'd seen in years. No one trying to commit fraud would be stupid enough to inflate a deduction by 700%. My client ended up getting a refund because the audit revealed he'd been underreporting some legitimate expenses. So your mistake actually saved him money? About $1,200. He sends me a Christmas card every year with a picture of his commercial printer. The food arrived as Margaret finished her story, and we spent the next hour discovering shared preferences and surprising differences. Margaret was more adventurous with flavors than I'd expected, trying bites of my risotto and offering samples of her osso buco without self-consciousness. I found myself relaxing completely for the first time since Tuesday, remembering why I'd been attracted to her beyond the physical. "Can I ask you something personal?" Margaret said as we waited for dessert. "Shoot. What ended your last relationship?" The question was fair, but it required me to examine something I'd mostly avoided thinking about. Her name was Sarah. We dated for 2 years, lived together for 6 months. She was a marketing executive, very ambitious, very focused on building the right kind of life. The right kind of life meaning what? Country club membership, house in the right neighborhood, husband with the right kind of job. She kept hinting that I should consider going back to school, maybe getting into real estate development or construction management. Something with more prestige. Margaret's expression tightened almost imperceptibly. She wanted to change you. She wanted to improve me. There's a difference, apparently. No, there isn't. What did you do? Tried to be what she wanted for about 6 months. Looked into business school programs, started networking with developers, even bought some polo shirts. And khakis. I shook my head at the memory. I was miserable. Finally, I realized I was trying to become someone else to make her happy, which meant she wasn't happy with who I actually was. How did it end? I told her I loved my work, loved building things with my hands, and wasn't interested in changing careers to fit her vision of success. She said I was limiting myself and holding her back. We broke up the next week. Margaret reached across the table and covered my hand with hers. "I'm sorry. That must have been painful." It was, but also liberating. I learned that the right person doesn't try to fix you or make you into someone else. The right person appreciates who you are and supports you becoming the best version of yourself. Exactly. I turned my hand palm up, intertwining our fingers. "What about you? Any relationship disasters I should know about?" Margaret laughed softly. "Just one. His name was Robert, and he was perfect for 17 years until cancer took him away." The honesty of her answer hit me like a physical blow. Here I was complaining about an ex-girlfriend who didn't appreciate my career choice, while Margaret had lost the love of her life to disease. "I'm sorry. That was insensitive of me to ask." "No, it wasn't. You have every right to know about my past, just like I wanted to know about yours. Robert and I had a wonderful marriage, but it's over now. I can't spend the rest of my life comparing every man I meet to a ghost." "Do you? Compare, I mean." Margaret considered the question seriously. "Sometimes, but not in the way you might think. I don't compare personalities or looks or interests. I compare how you make me feel. And how do I make you feel? Alive. Like I'm worth taking risks for. Like the future might hold adventures I haven't imagined yet." The waiter arrived with our dessert, tiramisu to share, but neither of us paid much attention to the food. We were too busy studying each other's faces, trying to read the intentions and possibilities reflected there. "Margaret," I said finally, "I need you to know something." "What?" "This isn't casual for me. I don't usually get involved with clients, and I definitely don't usually feel this strongly about someone I've known for less than a week. If we're going to do this, I want to do it right." "What does doing it right look like?" "Taking time to really get to know each other, meeting your friends, introducing you to my family, building something solid instead of just enjoying the excitement of something new." Margaret smiled, the expression transforming her entire face. "I was hoping you'd say something like that." "Yeah? Jake, I've been married. I know the difference between infatuation and something with real potential. This feels like real potential." Outside the restaurant, the Scottsdale evening was cooling toward comfort. Margaret slipped her hand into mine as we walked to my truck. the gesture natural and unforced. "What's next on our agenda?" she asked. I was thinking we could walk around Old Town for a while, maybe find somewhere with live music. I'd like that. But first, can I tell you something? Of course. Margaret stopped walking and turned to face me under a streetlight. I haven't felt this hopeful about anything in 3 years. Thank you for taking a chance on something complicated. I cupped her face in my hands, marveling at how perfectly she fit against my palms. Thank you for being brave enough to ask if you were too old for me. For the record, she said, rising up on her toes to bring her lips closer to mine. I'm not too old for anything. 6 months later, I found myself standing on Margaret's deck again, but this time with an engagement ring hidden in my toolbox and a carefully planned speech that I'd practiced in the mirror for 2 weeks. The October morning was crisp with the first hint of autumn, and the cedar planks I'd installed had weathered to a beautiful silver gray that caught the early sunlight perfectly. Margaret was inside making coffee, humming something off-key while she moved around the kitchen. The sound made me smile. She'd been right about her singing voice, but I'd discovered I loved it anyway. It was uniquely hers, unguarded and joyful in a way that summed up everything about the woman I'd fallen completely in love with. The past 6 months had been a revelation. What started as attraction had deepened into something I hadn't believed possible. A partnership that challenged me to be better while accepting me exactly as I was. Margaret had kept her promise about adventures, dragging me to tango lessons, where we'd laughed ourselves silly trying to master the basic steps. I'd kept my promise about building something lasting, introducing her to my parents 3 months ago, and watching my mother immediately adopt her as the daughter she'd never had. "You're up early," Margaret said, stepping onto the deck with 2 steaming mugs. She wore one of my old flannel shirts over leggings, her hair loose around her shoulders. 6 months of happiness had softened the grief lines around her eyes, replacing them with laugh lines that appeared whenever she looked at me. "Couldn't sleep. Too much coffee yesterday." "Liar. You've been restless all week. What's going on in that head of yours?" This was the problem with dating someone as perceptive as Margaret. She noticed everything. For the past week, I'd been carrying the engagement ring in my truck, waiting for the perfect moment to propose. But every opportunity had felt either too staged or too casual, leaving me second-guessing myself until I was ready to climb the walls. Just thinking about the Henderson kitchen project. We start the demo on Monday. Margaret settled into the patio chair beside me, tucking her legs under her. "The Hendersons who called you after the bathtub disaster?" "The same ones. Turns out Mrs. Henderson has been telling all her friends about the contractor who fixed his own mistake without charging extra. I've gotten 4 referrals from her bridge club. That's wonderful, see? Good work and integrity always pay off in the end." I nodded, distracted by the weight of the ring box in my pocket. The truth was, the Henderson project was the least of my concerns. What occupied my thoughts was the conversation I'd had with Margaret's daughter Jessica 2 weeks ago. Jessica lived in Denver with her husband and 2 young children. She'd flown in for a surprise visit, ostensibly to see her mother, but really to meet the man who'd been making her mom so happy. I'd been terrified of the encounter, knowing that Jessica's approval was crucial to any future with Margaret. The weekend had gone better than I'd dared hope. Jessica was warm, intelligent, and obviously devoted to her mother's well-being. Over dinner Saturday night, she'd pulled me aside for a conversation that started as protective interrogation and ended with her blessing. "I haven't seen my mom this happy since before Dad got sick," Jessica had said. "She lights up when she talks about you, and she started making plans again instead of just existing day to day." "I love her," I replied simply. "I want to spend the rest of my life making her happy." "Good. Because if you hurt her, I'll drive down from Denver and make your life very uncomfortable." The threat had been delivered with a smile, but I'd understood the steel beneath it. Jessica was protective of her mother, and rightfully so, but she'd also given me the encouragement I needed to take the next step. "Jake." Margaret's voice brought me back to the present. "You're doing that thing where you disappear into your own head again." "Sorry, I was thinking about Jessica's visit. She likes you, you know. Called me Tuesday night to say you were good for me and I should keep you." "She told you that?" "Among other things. She also said you asked her some interesting questions about family traditions, and what kind of engagement ring her father had given me. My heart stopped. She told you about that? Margaret's smile was radiant. Jake Peterson, are you planning to propose to me? So much for the carefully planned speech and romantic surprise. But looking at Margaret's face, seeing the hope and joy there, I realized the perfect moment wasn't about location or timing. It was about honesty and love, and the courage to ask for what you wanted most. I stood up and pulled the ring box from my pocket, dropping to one knee on the deck I'd built for her 6 months ago. Margaret's hands flew to her mouth, the coffee mug forgotten on the side table. Margaret Sullivan, I said, opening the box to reveal the vintage emerald ring I'd found after weeks of searching. I love you more than I thought it was possible. To love another person. You make me laugh, you challenge me to be better, and you've taught me that taking risks is the only way to build something beautiful. Tears were streaming down her cheeks, but she was smiling so widely I could barely make out her features. I want to wake up next to you every morning for the rest of my life. I want to travel to Ireland with you and learn to tango properly and support you through whatever adventures you decide to pursue. I want to build a life with you that's strong enough to weather any storm. I took a shaky breath, trying to remember the rest of my speech. Will you marry me? Yes, Margaret said before I'd finished the question. Yes, yes, absolutely yes. She launched herself off the chair and into my arms, nearly knocking me over in the process. I slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, marveling at how perfectly it fit. How long have you been planning this? She asked, admiring the emerald in the morning light. Since about 2 weeks after we met. The ring shopping took 4 months because I wanted something as unique as you are. It's perfect. Everything about this is perfect. We spent the morning on the deck, making phone calls to family and friends, sharing our news with people who'd watched our relationship develop with varying degrees of amazement and approval. My parents were thrilled, my mother immediately launching into wedding planning discussions before I could get her off the phone. Jessica cried happy tears and admitted she'd been hoping for this outcome since meeting me. What about a timeline? Margaret asked after we'd exhausted our contact lists. I'm 49 years old, Jake. I don't need a long engagement to figure out if I want to spend my life with you. What are you thinking? Spring wedding? April, maybe? Something simple but elegant. I want our friends and family there, but I don't need a massive production. April sounds perfect. Gives us time to plan without overthinking everything. Good. Because I have some ideas about where we should go for our honeymoon. I raised an eyebrow. Oh? Ireland. 2 weeks, starting in County Cork where my grandmother was born. We can work our way north, stay in bed and breakfasts, and take our time. The thought of 2 weeks alone with Margaret in the Irish countryside was almost too good to contemplate. That sounds incredible. I already started researching flights and accommodations, just in case. I laughed, pulling her closer. You've been planning this longer than you're admitting. Maybe. I'm a very goal-oriented person when I know what I want. The rest of the day passed in a haze of happiness and planning. We drove to my parents' house for an impromptu engagement celebration, where my mother produced a bottle of champagne she'd been saving for a special occasion, and my father gave Margaret a hug that lasted long enough to make her cry again. Welcome to the family, he said gruffly. You're getting a good man, but I suspect you already know that. I'm getting the best man, Margaret replied, squeezing my hand. I'm very lucky. We're the lucky ones, my mother interjected. Jake's been happier these past 6 months than I've seen him in years. You're good for each other. Emma and Patrick arrived an hour later with the twins, who immediately commandeered Margaret's attention with demands for horsey rides and stories. Watching her interact with my nephews, seeing how naturally she fit into my family's chaos, I felt a peace I hadn't realized I'd been missing. Uncle Jake's getting married, 4-year-old Tyler announced to the room at large. Does that mean we get cake? It means you get to be ring bearers, Margaret said, kneeling down to their level. Do you know what that means? We carry the rings? Tommy asked uncertainty. That's right. Very important job. Think you can handle it? Both boys nodded solemnly, already taking their responsibilities seriously. Emma caught my eye over their heads and mouthed, I love her, confirming what I already knew. Margaret had charmed my entire family as effortlessly as she'd charmed me. As the evening wound down and we prepared to leave, My mother pulled me aside. For a private conversation. She's perfect for you, she said simply. I wasn't sure at first, the age difference, her being widowed, the fact that you met through work. But watching you two together today, it's obvious you belong with each other. I love her, Mom, more than I knew was possible. I can see that. What I want you to know is that she loves you the same way. That woman looks at you like you hung the moon, and she's not afraid to show it. That's rare, sweetheart. Don't take it for granted. I won't. Good. Now, about the wedding planning. We spent another hour discussing venues, guest lists, and catering options before Margaret finally rescued me with the excuse that we needed to get home. The drive back to her house was comfortable and quiet, both of us processing the magnitude of the day's events. Any second thoughts? Margaret asked as we pulled into her driveway. Only about waiting so long to ask. What about you? Only about whether 6 months was long enough to really know someone before saying yes to marriage. My stomach dropped. And? Margaret's laughter filled the truck cab. Jake, I knew I wanted to marry you about 2 weeks after we met. The only reason I didn't propose to you was outdated gender expectations. You would have proposed to me? Eventually. I was giving you until Christmas to figure it out, then I was taking matters into my own hands. The image of Margaret proposing to me was both terrifying and oddly appealing. I'm glad I beat you to it. Me too. Though I might have been more creative with the location. The deck was perfect. It's where everything started. Margaret leaned across the truck cab to kiss me, her hand resting on my chest over my heart. No, everything started when you showed up at my door with your careful measurements and your willingness to explain things without talking down to me. The deck was just the excuse that brought us together. Best excuse ever. Definitely. Though, I still need to find other projects around the house to keep you busy. About that, I said, pulling her closer. I was thinking maybe it's time you moved into my place. Or we found somewhere new together. Margaret pulled back to study my face. You want to live together before the wedding? I want to live together. Period. The wedding is just paperwork. What matters is building a life together, and we can't do that if we're splitting time between 2 houses. Your place or mine. Whichever one feels more like home for both of us. Margaret considered this seriously. Your place has better workshop space for your tools, but mine has a better kitchen and garden. Plus, I just spent a fortune getting the deck repaired. We could keep both for a while, see which one we use more naturally. Or, Margaret said slowly, we could sell both and find something that's ours from the beginning. Something we choose together. The idea had merit. Starting fresh in a space that belonged to both of us, without the ghosts of previous relationships or the practical limitations of houses chosen for different life circumstances. I like that idea. What are you thinking? Still in Phoenix? Maybe Sedona. Smaller town, beautiful scenery, good market for both our businesses. We could find something with character that needs some work. Something I could renovate for us. Something we could renovate together. I've been watching you work for 6 months. I think I could learn to be handy with tools. The image of Margaret wielding a hammer while wearing safety glasses made me grin. I'd love to teach you. Fair warning, though, I'm a demanding instructor. I'm a good student when I'm motivated. And I'm very motivated to build something beautiful with you. We sat in the truck for another hour, talking about house hunting and wedding planning and honeymoon itineraries. The practical discussions felt as romantic as any declaration of love because they were about the future we were choosing to create together. One more thing, Margaret said as we finally headed inside. I want to keep my name professionally, but take yours personally. Is that okay with you? Whatever makes you happy makes me happy. Margaret Peterson has a nice ring to it. Mrs. Peterson sounds even better. Inside the house, we settled onto the couch with glasses of wine and Margaret's laptop, browsing real estate listings in Sedona and bookmarking possibilities for weekend drives. The domestic scene felt both novel and familiar, like something we'd been doing for years rather than months. This one, Margaret said, pointing to a 1970s ranch house with good bones and stunning red rock views. Needs a complete kitchen renovation and bathroom updates, but look at that lot. We could expand the deck, maybe add a workshop space for you. Privacy, mountain views, and projects to keep us busy for years. Sounds perfect. Want to drive up tomorrow and take a look? It's Saturday. Don't you have other plans? Margaret closed the laptop and turned to face me fully. Jake, you just proposed to me this morning. My only plan for the foreseeable future is enjoying being engaged to the man I love and planning our life together. When you put it that way. Besides, house hunting together sounds like the perfect way to spend our first day as an engaged couple. I pulled her into my arms, marveling at how naturally she fit against my side. I love you, Margaret Peterson. I love you too, Jake Peterson. Now stop talking and kiss your fiancé. Outside, the Phoenix night settled over the neighborhood with its familiar sounds of traffic and air conditioners and distant conversations. But inside Margaret's living room, wrapped in each other's arms and surrounded by the promise of the future we were building together, the world felt exactly the right size. 6 months ago, I'd been a contractor fixing a rotting deck for a lonely widow. Tonight, I was an engaged man planning a wedding, a honeymoon, and a lifetime with the woman who'd had the courage to ask if she was too old for me. The answer, I'd learned, was that love doesn't recognize age or timing or any of the practical considerations that seem so important until you find the person who makes them irrelevant. Margaret wasn't too old for me. She was exactly the right age to know what she wanted and brave enough to ask for it, and I was exactly the right man to spend the rest of my life proving she'd made the perfect choice. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.